Prairie Yard and Garden is a production of the University of Minnesota Morris in cooperation with Pioneer Public Television. Funding for Prairie Yard and Garden is provided in part by Heartland Motor Company, providing service for over 30 years in the heart of truck country. Heartland Motor Company, we have your best interest at heart. Farmers Mutual Telephone Company and Federated Telephone Cooperative, proud to be powering ASERA. Mark and Margaret Yackel Jolene, in honor of Shalom Hill Farm, a nonprofit rural education retreat center in a beautiful prairie setting near Windham in southwestern Minnesota. ShalomHill.org.
I remember as a young girl being so excited when my dad came home with a red pine tree seedling, and he said I could help plant it. So off we went to the garden, dug a hole. Number 2, we planted it, and number 3, we carried water to give it a good start. Today that tree towers over the prairie and is a great remembrance of my parents. Come along with Prairie Yard and Garden as we learn that planting a tree is as easy as 1, 2, 3. I love to hear stories of families who plant a new tree in the yard when they have a baby. You might say the tree and the baby can grow up together, and you just know the child will have a fun time climbing in the tree or playing in its shade. I think many people are afraid to go out on a limb and plant a tree because they just don't know how. Gary Johnson from the University of Minnesota is here with us to teach us how to plant trees so our technique is made in the shade and not scary at all. Welcome, Gary.
Thank you, Mary. I'm really glad to be back to Morris, and especially to the beautiful gardens here.
Gary, how long have you been involved with tree health and tree planting?
Well, professionally, this is kind of scary to say this, but 49 years. 49 years ago, I started working for the first nursery when I was in college, and 48 years ago, I started working in research on oak health.
Okay, we're getting ready to plant a tree. What are some of the things that we need to consider before we even go to the nursery or go and get a tree?
I would say that the first question for you to answer is, what do you want the tree to do? Do you want it to provide fruit? Do you want it to provide some wildlife value? Most people plant trees for shade or for climbing trees. So that's the first thing, because that'll tell you the species and the size that you're going to be looking for. Second thing I look at is really how much space is available. That's probably the biggest mistake that people make, is not realizing, and it's not intuitive, when you see these small trees in a nursery, that they're going to get 10, 20, 30 times bigger than that. The unforgotten factor is soil. And soil is one of those things that supports everything, but most people really don't think about it. I mean, why would you think about it? It's underneath your feet. But soil chemistry, the pH of the soil, does it drain well? Not all trees do well in the same soil pH. Not all trees do well in quickly draining soils or slowly draining soils. The next thing, definitely exposure. Like you and I are in full sun. There are a lot of plants, actually most plants are going to do best in full sun, but not all of them. And if you are trying to choose a plant that may be really sensitive to too much sun, like hemlocks, for instance, they're never going to thrive if they're planted in full sun. Along with that type of exposure, wind. Wind is kind of a litmus test for a lot of plants in Minnesota. Are they going to be able to survive the summer winds that dry the soil out so quickly in the leaves? Are they going to be able to survive the winter winds that dry the buds out so much? You definitely have to think about hardiness zone, but hardiness zone, I'm afraid too many people use that as the sole condition for selecting a tree. Oh, is it hardy to zone 3 or zone 4? Think about what it's like in the summertime too. The hardiness zone has nothing more to do than what's the average minimum cold temperature. And think about how bad and how hot it gets in the summertime too. So those are just kind of a quick collection of things. It's a lot more than just going, oh, that's a pretty tree.
Do you have to worry about things like sidewalks and structures and things too?
Absolutely, and that's kind of falls under the category how much space you have. You're looking at space above ground utility wires. Most of them in an urban area are going to be right around 25 feet tall. And it doesn't take a mathematician to figure out that if you plant a tree that's going to mature to 50 feet, you're going to have some problems. But below ground also, the width of a boulevard. In our research, boulevards that are less than 6 to 8 feet wide, even with medium-sized trees, are going to end up causing some problems in the future as the trees get so big. In a narrow boulevard, they tend to start lifting sidewalks. And then when the sidewalks are repaired, well, the reason why you're repairing them is because the roots are lifting it. The roots are cut off, and now the tree is very, very unstable. And the next windstorm comes along. Those trees that have been next to sidewalk panels being repaired because their roots bother them are 2.4 times more likely to go down in a windstorm. This was 2013 research that we conducted. Boulevards are shared spaces with buried utilities like electrical utilities, gas lines, water lines, sewer lines. They all have a finite lifespan. They all have to be repaired. The more room that is shared by the tree roots and the utilities, the less likely any one of those factors are going to be damaged when they have to be repaired.
What is the difference? I've heard the terms containerized trees, balled and burlapped, bare root. Can you explain what those mean? Because I think you can get trees in all of those sizes or in all those ways.
Yes. All tree species start out as bare root trees, and they're either started in a field and then they're dug up bare rooted. So this is fairly typical of what you would be if you were a garden center, or if you're purchasing from SWCD, or if you are near a nursery. There are quite a few nurseries in Minnesota that sell trees in the springtime bare rooted. So this is fairly typical for, this happens to be a bur oak, and bur oak tends to kind of have a coarse, rangy root system. You have field-grown trees, they're dug up bare rooted, and then these are either directly planted into the landscape, or they're planted into a gravel bed, or they're put in a container and then finished off in a container. So in Minnesota, most bare root trees that end up in a container are containerized somewhere between April and early June. And by midsummer to late summer, they have a really good fibrous network in that containerized, and then they can be planted out right up until the ground freezes.
If I go to the nursery or I go someplace and I buy a bare root tree, do I have to worry about those roots being exposed to the air and to the elements and drying out before I get them into the ground?
Absolutely.
How much time do I have?
Well, with these little fine roots, you've got maybe a minute or two.
Really?
Yeah, but the good part is the fine roots generate off of the coarse woody roots. These are the roots that you want to make sure that you keep nice and moist too. So if you do pick these up in the spring from a nursery as a bare root plant, I recommend taking along like a kitchen garbage bag. As soon as you get them, put them in the kitchen garbage bag, wrap it tightly around the stem, get it home. And so they should be kept shady. One of the things that you can do to make that a little bit less vulnerable is I call this tasteless gelatin. And this is hydrogel, which is an inert, basically it's a water holding product, and it's kind of fun to play with too. There's no taste to it, there are no nutrients to it at all, it's just a polymer. And what it does is if you dip the roots in there, just like with my fingers, it coats the roots. Okay. But as it dries then on the roots, it seals in the moisture. And it really works well too in another type of bare rooted. So you can get bare rooted in the spring. And the Soil and Water Conservation District is really, really good about making bare root trees available to property owners, et cetera. You can buy wildlife packages, et cetera. But those are bare root trees. And if you don't want to plant in the spring, because I really recommend planting in the autumn, late summer to autumn, what you can do with those bare root trees is put them in pea stone, just a real fine gravel. If you have an old wading pool, that works. A wading pool will hold probably about 50 trees this size. And you put about this much pea stone in it, and just once a day, irrigate it with your garden hose to keep the stone moist. And all summer long, like with this, when this was put in the spring, it just had this one coarse root. This is walnut. All these fine roots have developed in that pea stone. And then when it comes time to transplant this and take it out into the landscape, you can dip it in the hydrogel if you want to. It just gives a little bit more assurance that it's going to stay moist. And then put it again in a plastic bag.
Until you get it to where you need it to be?
Until you get it to where you need to water it. And again, the key on this too is, if you can, keep it in the shade, because these heat up really fast.
Sure.
So this allows you to not only plant bare root trees in the spring when they're available, but also you can hold them all summer long and then plant them in the summertime when there's less of a stress, a moisture stress at the end of the summer or in the autumn, because the plants are shutting down. They don't need so much moisture.
Heard that if you're going to plant bare root, it should be in the spring or in the fall, but if you have it containerized, you can plant throughout the season.
Exactly. Most trees and shrubs in the United States now are marketed as containerized.
Okay.
There are some nurseries, and we have a couple in Minnesota that have container-grown trees. They collect the seed source or the cuttings, they direct sow them or stick them in containers, and the plant spends its entire life in the container until you purchase it. There are two types of containers. Basically, there's the smooth-sided. This is the most common, and we'll talk a little bit more about spinning roots or pot-bound roots. This is the kind of container that really promotes spinning roots, pot-bound roots. The other type is called an air root pruning, and this one has all these slits in here that allow oxygen to penetrate in here. So roots need, not a whole lot. They get all the energy from the leaf. They don't manufacture their own food or energy. It all comes from the leaves photosynthesizing. They need moisture. They need oxygen. They're just like you and I. They're breathing. And then they also need growth hormones that are produced up in here, move down to the root system, and that's what stimulates them to grow. Well, with these slits in here, any of those things in excess kills the roots. Too much water, too much oxygen, too much. So when the little roots that normally hit the side of a smooth container and start growing around, when the little roots hit these air pockets, it kills the tips of them. Just the tip. And then they start branching out back further into the container. So what ends up happening is, first of all, there are no encircling roots. This tree has been in this container for a year now, and there are no encircling roots. And then when you open this up, you'll see that there are roots all the way into the center. So nice fibrous roots in there. And that's because the oxygen is penetrating. It's called diffusing. So the oxygen is going in through the sides and it's diffusing all the way into the center. In smooth-sided containers, you get almost all the roots in this kind of a crust around the inside of it. And these, you don't get any encircling roots, and you have root formation all the way into the body of the container.
Okay.
Yep.
Now, I have heard the term also a grafted tree.
Yep.
What is that?
A grafted tree, almost always if you purchase a tree like, let's say, a Norway maple, and it has a fancy name to it, like Deborah or Glen Ellen or something, that has been budded or grafted. So you have a rootstock, and then on the rootstock they graft something that has some aesthetic attribute. One of the Norway maples that people really like is Crimson King. Mm-hmm. So all summer long, that has that nice, real deep burgundy color to that. Well, Norway maples don't normally have that. So they basically clone those trees onto regular Norway maple rootstocks. So they get a good hardy Norway maple rootstock, they bud on the fancy colored leaves. Other times you'll see what looks like this has been grafted here. Mm-hmm. This isn't grafted, this has been headed back. So this is a straight bur oak native to Minnesota. They let it grow up in the nursery, then they cut it back. And when it cuts back, it quickly water sprouts nice and fast and straight. And they pick out the best. You usually have 2, 3, 4, 5 water sprouts. coming up from there. And they pick out the best one and they prune off the rest of them. So you're going to see this little bit of a crook that looks a lot like a graft union, but it's not. It's just where it's headed back. If I wouldn't have killed this by digging it up for a demonstration, within a couple of years, you won't even see this little mark there.
So why not just let the tree grow originally the way it was?
Well, sometimes if they grow perfectly straight, you can do that. But in a production nursery, they're trying to produce trees with a stem that's just straight as an arrow because that's what people want.
Sure.
And so the way to do that is you've got a lot of energy in the root system, and if you head it back like that, you get a lot of growth above ground. So you just pick out the one.
It used to be, years back, that they would say that if you had a grafted tree or something like this, that you should plant this below ground level.
Mm-hmm.
Is that still the case?
You know, that's one of those logical things that's not biological. It seems like, well, we're in a cold climate and you'd want to protect this graft union. No, don't do that. Because if you protected this graft union, you just buried this tree 4 inches too deep. And the irony of it is, how deep does the ground freeze in this part of Minnesota? Mm-hmm. About 50 inches. Mm-hmm. Which is a little bit deeper than 4 inches. Yeah. So the whole thing is, when you think about it, it's like, well, that makes no sense because it gets much colder than that anyway. And then the worst part is you've already buried it too deeply then. Okay. And when you bury it too deeply, then it's more difficult for soil oxygen and moisture to get to those roots. And remember, that's what they need.
We also talked about balled and burlapped. What is that? Usually those are bigger trees, I think,
yes.
Right?
Yeah, bigger trees, a lot of evergreens are balled and burlapped. And those, you grow up a little bit larger. This is an 1.25 inch caliper tree. So you measure up 6 inches, and the thickness, this would be 1.25 inches. Okay. Usually with balled and burlap trees, those are 2 inches and larger. So it will be a stem about this big up to 3 inches. We have nurseries in Minnesota that sell up to 9-inch caliper trees. So those come with a soil ball on them. So those are grown in the field. Then most of them are machine dug. Not too many people hand dig anymore. They're machine dug with a tree spade. They're set down in a wire basket that's lined with burlap. So that's called balled and burlap. Then it's tied up and moved to the planting site, installed.
Should that basket be taken off or broken up, or is the tree going to be okay in that basket?
That has been one of the more controversial myths for a long time too. There has never ever been any research that has shown that leaving a wire basket on is harmful to the health of a tree.
Really?
Yeah. Now intuitively you think, well, this can't be bad because I keep hitting it with a lawnmower, those little ears that stick out of the ground. Absolutely, it's bad for your lawnmower, but it's not bad for the tree because the roots will grow through. And even as they enlarge, you know, these are fairly good-sized spaces in the wire basket. And the roots grow through, and as they enlarge, they basically embed the wire. It becomes part of the root system, and they function just fine.
Gary, today we're at the West Central Research and Outreach Center, and the students that work here are willing to plant a tree. Would you be willing to kind of tell us and walk us through the steps of doing it?
Absolutely. This is what I love to do.
Thank you.
I have a question. Can you share with me an early ripening apple that grows well in Minnesota?
You know, the best early apple is Zestar with an exclamation point. It's the University of Minnesota apple that came out in 1998. For years, people were growing Beacon and State Fair, Oriole, Mantat. Those are all good apples. They taste good. They're good for pies and things. And especially since you haven't had fresh apples for months, they're a great way to kick off the season. But Zestar knocks all of those apples out of the water. It has much better flavor and texture, and it stores for 2 months. It has a kind of a mixture of a sweet tart flavor with kind of a hint of brown sugar. And it's a crisp texture like Honeycrisp, but not quite kind of a tender crisp. It's still, a chunk breaks off, it's juicy, it's just really a good apple. And so people that think, oh, you have to wait for a hard frost before you get quality apples, really not true. Zestar is the very best apple to kick off the apple season.
Ask the Arboretum Experts has been brought to you by the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum in Chanhassen, dedicated to enriching lives through the appreciation and knowledge of plants.
Gary, how do we know how deep to plant a tree?
Great question. And planting depth is the most critical thing that we're going to do today. In our research at the university and around the country, as little as 1 inch of excess soil over the first main order root for some plants can spell long-term decline in health. So I'm going to use a probe to find out where along this trunk is the first most shallow root, and there's one right there that's about maybe 1/3 of an inch deep. So this tree was planted in the container at the right depth. No adjustments to it. So now we'll take the tree out of the container. We'll check for encircling roots. And there are some encircling roots in here, but they're all fibrous. They're very small roots. And these are going to break out into the soil. They don't need to be sliced or pruned or anything. And again, this is University of Minnesota research. This is published years ago, that these roots are perfectly good. Even though they're encircling, they'll branch out into the roots. If there are larger ones, woody ones, different story.
How large?
Oh, about the size of a pencil, about the thickness of a pencil.
Okay.
Millimeter wise, it's like 7 millimeters. So this tree is ready to go in terms of depth. And then also, we don't have to do any root pruning on this at all.
Okay.
You can if you want to. It won't hurt it. It just doesn't help it. So now, by the way, this is a good way, too, of lifting the tree in a container to make sure that it's well rooted in the container. So the next thing is we kind of center it in the hole. Make sure it's still at the right depth. Perfect. So the depth is great. We'll take off this temporary stem protection, because this inhibits the stem from growing out. Stems photosynthesize just like leaves, and so the photosynthesis of the stems is what allows the trunk to get larger and larger and larger. So we have to take that off before we walk away from this tree. And now we'll turn it over to the planters.
Okay.
And as they plant it and backfill it, we can kind of straighten the whole tree. So you can go ahead and finish that off.
Should you add peat moss or compost to the hole as you're planting and as you're filling it in?
That's a really good question. If this was a really sandy soil, absolutely. I would use, well, I like compost or dehydrated, decomposed manures, things like that. Mix it into the existing soil, because what that does is it holds moisture. And then any nutrients that ever get added to this, any fertilizers that get added to it, that compost or leaf mold or manures help hold that, help retain those nutrients. Good soil, I mean, this is beautiful soil. This absolutely needs nothing but water.
Should you generally, should you add fertilizer at the time of tree planting?
Again, that depends a lot on the soil and the type of tree you're planting. Nutrients are absorbed by the fine roots. This still has a lot of fine roots on it. So this one, you could add some nutrients to it. You would add right where the root system is, not out here. Because most of the fertilizers that you add, the synthetic fertilizers, the nutrients are going to be gone in 1.5 to 2 months, long before the roots actually grow out into there. Okay. So you would want to add it right where they are now. If they're bare-rooted trees, they pretty much have lost their fine roots, for a good part of this season. Wait till next year before you add any nutrients to it. Okay. It'll just be wasted this year. It doesn't hurt them, it's just a waste.
Okay. And then do you step down the soil as you put it in around there
Yes.
tamp it down?
And actually, if Dylan can come over here and with a shovel kind of drive it down alongside here, facing the tree, and he's going to use the shovel as kind of a pry, just to tilt it back until we can see that it's nice and straight.
Okay.
And then we'll compact it. And Dylan, you have bigger feet than me. You can really compact that over there. Perfect. Born to plant trees.
And while they get more soil and put it in, you want to talk about the watering equipment that you can use too?
Yep. The most critical aftercare thing is watering. And the rule of thumb is for each inch of stem caliper, so this is about 1 inch there, for each inch you need about 1.5 gallons to 2 gallons of water per irrigation. And you need to irrigate 2 times a week for the life of the tree through the growing season. And the growing season for the roots will go well into the autumn. So 2 times a week. Don't listen to weather reports. 2 times a week, and then this one would take about 1.5 gallons to 2 gallons per irrigation. So you can use a slow dripping hose. You could use a tree diaper. And once the final soil gets placed around this, the tree diaper sits on the top. Inside the tree diaper is the same hydrogel that we mixed up earlier. And as soon as this gets irrigated, it blows up.
So it absorbs right
Yeah.
through there. Oh, this is like landscape fabric, so it
Exactly.
absorbs the moisture.
Yep, and then it seeps out through the soil. And every time you irrigate or it rains, this rehydrates and then seeps out, rehydrates, seeps out. And this lasts for about 3 years.
Where can you get those?
Oh, just go online and type in tree watering diaper, tree diaper, yep.
Okay.
This is a watering bag, and a lot of garden centers carry these now. You can get, this is a 20-gallon one, so they slip around the trunk, they zip up. There's a little watering hole right up in here. You can fill this up. Both this and the tree diaper actually act as mulch too, keeps the soil from drying out. Fill this up a couple times a week, or like I said, you can get smaller ones too, 5 gallon, 10 gallons. So this works very well too. This is called a water ring. Again, all these things, if you just go online and type in those keywords, tree water ring, tree watering bag, tree water ring slips around, fill it up, that holds 5 gallons of water, and it takes about 3 or 4 hours for it to seep out. And then the last that I brought with me, this is just soaker hose.
Sure.
And it's in a ring, so you just disconnect it to get it around the trunk of the tree. This hooks up to your hose. Run it for probably about a half hour to 45 minutes, and that'll distribute 1.5 gallons of water around the tree. Any type of organic mulch is really nice because it breaks down and becomes soil. Rock mulch is fine too. It's just most people like the looks of organic mulch better. So wood chip mulch, bark mulch, etc. And after you mulch, just kind of come to the stem and pull the mulch away from the stem. You don't want the mulch piled up against the stem, because mulch is nothing more, organic mulch is nothing more than pre-soil. Eventually, and mulch always breaks down from the bottom first, and it's becoming soil. So if you pile mulch against the stem, you're actually in effect burying the stem too deeply.
Gary, you have given us wonderful information, and you've showed us that planting a tree is as easy as 1, 2, 3, but would you come back sometime and talk about more care, pruning, and problems that trees can have?
Oh, absolutely. I can't believe you had to ask me if I would do that. I mean, it's hard for me not to talk about trees, so yeah, I'll be more than glad to.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Funding for Prairie Yard and Garden is provided in part by Heartland Motor Company, providing service for over 30 years in the heart of truck country. Heartland Motor Company, we have your best interest at heart. Farmers Mutual Telephone Company and Federated Telephone Cooperative, proud to be powering ASERA. Mark and Margaret Yackel Jolene, in honor of Shalom Hill Farm, a nonprofit rural education retreat center in a beautiful prairie setting near Windham in southwestern Minnesota. ShalomHill.org.